overall, we obviously want to be ingesting fluids every single day. Okay? How much is going to very much so depend on your level of activity, also how warm it is, and then not just the fluids you're going to be drinking, but also think about the foods you're eating. Certain foods are really high in water, like most of your fruits, a number of your vegetables. Some foods are really low in fluid. That's things like your cookies, along with also nuts. Now, we all have a number of different fluid compartments, okay? So yes, you can figure out, turns out babies are mostly water. Then as we become older and older, less of us becomes water, but still over half of it. Then from there we have protein and minerals, so we're talking about bones, muscles, connective tissue, etc., and then obviously our fat mass. Now, when it comes to our distribution, okay, if we're looking on the right over here, intracellular fluid is inside of what? Yeah, inside the cell. Extracellular fluid is, say again?
Outside of the cell.
But then what's interstitial fluid? Say again? So it's interstitial fluid. It's in between. It's still trying to figure itself out. It doesn't quite know what's going on. Now, guys, extracellular fluid is everything that's obviously not inside of our cells. Interstitial is going to be that fluid that's in between our cells, that's perhaps inside of our GI, and obviously that's separate from our actual blood plasma. So notice 30 plus 7.5 is 37.5. So the summative value of them. Now, whenever we drink water, what type of fluid volume is it immediately going to be added to? So we added exercise? So the second you put water inside of your body, where's it go? Think the digestive tract. It's going to be inside of your, so it's going to be, is that intracellular or extracellular at that point? Probably is extracellular because it's not in the cell yet, right? Right? Okay, so now that water has to be absorbed through our stomach lining, be absorbed through our small intestine lining, and then is it now intracellular? For a little bit when it's in the small intestine, but then where's it going after that? Hopefully we don't have diarrhea where the water's just going straight through us. That's a bad day. Okay? Instead, it's getting absorbed and it's going into our bloodstream. Okay? Now, once in our bloodstream, it can go around the body and then diffuse where it needs to be. So the problem is, if you are dehydrated and you've got to work out in 5 minutes, pounding a bottle of water is not helping you. It's too late because it's going to take a while for that water to cycle through your body. Does that make sense to you? Okay? So understanding that it's not like, and I am rehydrated because I drank a giant thing of water. Like, no, it takes a little bit to get through your system. So understanding that and then respecting it. Now, the reason we're going to care about fluid balance is because we're constantly trying to regulate our temperature. Okay? One of the things that human beings can do really well compared to a lot of other animal species, aside from getting fat, is we can sweat. So we're pretty good at thermoregulation. Okay? And we're also good at making clothes and wearing that around also to help with thermoregulation depending on the time of year. So, when we're exercising, turns out we are going to be producing a lot more heat. In fact, we're going to see the higher the intensity that we're exercising at, okay, the greater amount that we're going to be increasing our body temperature, which in turn, the greater amount of fluid loss that we're going to have. And if you guys think back to exercise phys with cardiovascular drift, we're also going to see that increase in our heart rate because of a decrease in our plasma blood volume. Okay? Now, where are we really storing heat whenever we're exercising? Where are we storing heat? Core. You're not wrong. It's throughout your entire body. Okay? The exercising muscles are going to be the ones that are really increasing our heat the most, or increasing our temperature the most. And that heat is being distributed because our blood is pumping through those muscles and essentially working like a radiator in a car. Okay? Pulling heat from the engine and distributing it through the rest of the body. That's why once we start working out, we tend to warm up. The entire body tends to be warm. So you're right, a lot of it is going to be in the biggest, thickest regions of the body, and it turns out that's going to be the core. Okay? Now, once we have this type of situation, turns out we're going to be sweating, and sweating as much as we need to in order to lose that weight. Okay? And that's via evaporation. So, we're just standing here right now. I'm radiating heat to the environment around me, and a solid amount of that heat is radiating out into what? It's essentially being trapped on me. Close. Exactly. Okay? So, anything that I'm touching, I'm actually now conducting heat to that surface. Okay? And if there was a breeze in here, which there's not, same thing, that is another source of that type of heat exchange. Okay? Normally, this works pretty well. So, Bailey, when you're home over the summer, and I mean like July or August, and there's a nice breeze going by, does that cool you down? Why not? Because it's like being in an oven or just having a total body hairdryer on you, right? Bailey's from Las Vegas. When it's 90 degrees, if there's a good breeze, you're like, okay, that's nice. It'll actually cool you down because it's cooler than you are. Okay, because that's surface that's going by you. Okay? Whereas if it's now hotter than your body temperature and it's going over your body, congratulations, you now feel like you're in a convection oven. Okay? Las Vegas in the summer, folks. Great place to go if you want to sweat out a lot. Good news is you don't really realize you're sweating that much all the time because it doesn't stay with you. Meanwhile, here when we're talking about evaporation, what's one of the major issues with evaporation? We're talking about getting into the summer. Humidity's so high, so does that water ever leave you? No, it might drip off you. It'll evaporate a little bit, but nowhere near the same degree you're going to get when you're in an arid environment. Okay? So, in order to optimize radiation, what do we do with our clothing? Optimize radiation if we're trying to cool ourselves down. Or? Let's try to find a middle ground there. Let's find a middle ground. Not a lot of places, maybe in Vegas you can get away with that a little bit more than you can here. Say it again? Yeah, but minimizing your clothing. So it's wearing just shorts, just a sleeveless shirt, anything else that we have as much surface area as possible to radiate upon. And at the same thing, what's radiating heat out upon you when you're outside during the day? Bingo. So I'm going to pick on Bailey again, but in those really like 115 odd degree days in the desert there, how does the sun feel on bare skin? And that's not even like you've been out there for like 10 minutes and like it physically hurts when it's that hot. Like you can actually feel it hitting you. It's very uncomfortable. For some reason, my conferences like to go to Vegas every other couple years, so we end up in Vegas in the middle of July. What's up? It's not. I don't like Vegas. It is a strange place. Everything is for sale. But everything has a cost. Not the most moral human being you'll ever meet, but dear God, it's a little bit much for my conservative values. Now, any questions as far as whenever we're trying to distribute heat via convection or also via conduction? That all seems relatively straightforward. So the one thing that we can really ramp up, aside from tactically planning with appropriate clothing, trying to make sure that we've got a fan on inside of the gym or something else to blow air on us, and then they have the misters, obviously, on the sidelines for some games. It's really sweating. That's the big key. So if we're going to be losing X amount of fluid, we have to replace that much fluid. So in the example of someone working out, and this is just 95 degrees at 30% humidity. So this is not as brutal as it can get here in the summer, or as hot as it can obviously get down in Texas or down in Nevada. But seeing a 3-liter loss over half an hour if someone is just exercising at a moderate intensity. Okay? 3 liters, meaning 1 liter of water is about the density of 1.0. Okay? So that's a kilogram of water per liter. So that's 3 kilograms of water, which means 6.6 pounds of water in an hour. Yeah. Think that person's going to be at risk for dehydration? Smidgen. Okay? Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind also when we're talking through the wonderful effects of being in these temperatures is how they measure core temperature. It's not fun. It involves a probe. What's up?
Didn't want to think about that.
Best case scenario? Actually, best case scenario, in all honesty, if you ever got to do one of these studies, is honestly up your butt. The other option is to put it in your nose and then swallow it down into your stomach.
Whoa.
And then you got to pull it out.
This is even worse.
Mm-hmm. The funny thing is, once it's in, you're good to go.
I wouldn't be able to breathe.
It's a very thin wire,
Oh.
and the
Still,
probe is not that big. Yeah.
Still though.
Oh no, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. It's like Total Recall, where you're like ripping something massive out of your nose. Like, it's just, it sits about the size of like an eraser head. So it's really not that bad. And then at the end of a thin wire. Oh, at the end of the day, I'll tell you guys a more disturbing story of when people make mistakes with this. Okay? So, whenever we're exercising, we're going to be regulating our body temperature. Okay? We're going to have all of the heat we're going to gain from the environment. Okay? This can be from obviously the sun radiating upon us, the warm air convecting on us, touching a hot surface. How many of you guys, and I know it happened for a lot of you ladies recently, what's it like whenever you fall on the turf, whenever it's hot and been out in the sun all day? How hot is it down there on the ground? And yeah, how many of you guys ever had a coach that made you do up downs and you had to be face down on that ground, feeling like you were essentially laying on a grill?
We had a game last year where feet were literally burning, like we had heat blisters. Yeah, I got that.
Through your cleats?
Yeah.
Sweet Jesus.
But we were coming down and we poured water on our feet, pull it down, and it started like blowing in our feet.
Yeah, that was a very dumb tactical decision. Hindsight is 20/20 though. Hindsight is 20/20. I mean, to be fair, that's why the back of my hand looks like that. It's the steam burn. Yeah, it's okay. Kind of looks like kind of jacked up sausages. So, okay. So now we also have the heat load we're going to get from just exercising. Okay, burning calories, contracting our muscles creates energy. Okay, so that's going to increase our heat load because remember, we're not 100% efficient. Okay, we then are sensing this temperature in 2 areas of our body. One is our skin. The other is actually inside of our core, specifically more in our nervous system. This is then integrated by that hypothalamus. Okay, looking at things like our blood pressure. Where's our osmolarity? How much sodium and calcium do we have in us? And then what's going on with our hormonal levels? Notice the first one the hormones are bringing up is estrogen. Why would estrogen have an effect on our hormonal, we know estrogen obviously being a hormone. Why would estrogen have an effect on our fluid balance? Why would that be? Anyone got a wild guess there? Okay, cool. I'll overshare from my world. I have a wife, and I have a little sister. And then for some reason, they like to tell me everything. Okay? My little sister, I know for a fact, and she's, yes, Sal?
I have an idea here, but I'm going to let you go.
No, depending on where they're at in their monthly cycle,
Yeah.
major changes in fluid balance in the body. So I at least know for what was that, Bree?
I was just saying, like, when
Bingo, exactly. Exactly. And that's fluid retention, okay, which can obviously make playing sports uncomfortable. Obviously, if you have to weigh in for one reason or another, that's going to really throw things off. If you're into the aesthetic type sports, if you're talking about, figure, bodybuilding, etc., that's going to throw your numbers off, and that's literally just due to hormonal fluctuations. And that can be either made better or made worse if we're now introducing birth control into the matter. Does that make sense? All of those are going to influence our natural fluid retention. Okay? And then we talk about cytokines, guys. That's the inflammatory markers. So how many of you guys, after really hard leg training, really hard arm training or something, literally the next day or two, your arms or legs were swollen? Like you could tell that they were puffy. And you'll sometimes see this in your joints. Like your joint will actually be swollen. And that's, once again, modifying that fluid balance. So then, from there, we've got two things we're going to do. We're going to send more blood to the skin, and then we're going to start sweating. Okay? Those are the two things that we can do. Now, when we start going and getting better at thermoregulation, okay, it actually is a skill. Okay? You are going to sweat more, literally fluid volume. You're going to sweat earlier, so it's going to start happening a lot faster in your workout, and your sweat is going to be less saturated with sodium and your other electrolytes. It's going to be less saturated. Does that make sense? So you sweat more, sweat faster, and sweat earlier, along with less saturated. So if anyone ever gives you trouble about being someone that sweats a lot, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that's equivalent of someone giving you trouble for being too smart or being too good looking. I mean, if it happens to you, good. You should rub that in their faces. Glad your body sucks so bad you can't even thermoregulate. Okay? Because that is a healthy change. Now, when it comes to becoming acclimatized, about how long is that going to take us? How long is that going to take us to get acclimatized? It's only going to take us about a week to 2 weeks. But the issue being, let's talk about the military. Okay? Right now you're here in Kentucky. Where are we currently in a number of skirmishes or otherwise? In the desert. You're used to Kentucky. If you've got to be on an airplane tonight getting flown over to the Middle East, how much time have you had to acclimatize to being out in the desert?
Not at all.
Okay? And think of it also along the lines of time of the year. Okay? It's fall right now because we're in what hemisphere on the planet? We're in the northern hemisphere. Okay? What season is it right now in the southern hemisphere? It's starting into spring. It makes sense? They're just leaving winter. So, same type of situation. Even if you lived in Las Vegas, okay, southern Texas, anything along those lines, and it's January, and then you have to go to some place in South America, some place in Africa, some place that's right in the southern hemisphere, are you going to be heat adapted and acclimatized? So that's a major problem that they try and work with. And the best way to go and acclimatize is actually to be in that area, to like flat out get used to those circumstances. And be active, but not super active. So we're talking 60% or less of your VO2 max. So for athletes, yeah, you got to show up and do 2-a-days, and unfortunately you don't. Well, you guys are definitely going to be ready for heat. Coming here probably actually seems a little bit nicer, except for the humidity. You might take you a little bit respiratory-wise to get used to the humidity again. Yeah, you still have humidity also in Texas. You got everything and it's awful. Now, so what you can go ahead and do is literally try to mimic heat stress. How can we mimic heat stress? Saunas, wearing a lot of clothing so that you're purposely trying to overheat yourself. So you're getting a little bit of that effect without actually being able to be in those environments. Okay? Now, not everybody's got a sauna that's big enough that they can work out in it, much less do they have a sauna. Okay? But you can at least try to go in a gym where you know the gyms are typically about 70 degrees and go in there wearing a couple layers and wearing a hat, so you're purposely trying to make it hotter than it really is going, or than you're obviously having to deal with outside, so you're going to at least have those adaptations. Yes?
Can sweat thermoregulation, can that be inherited through genes at all?
Yes. There are people that are referred to as salty sweaters and people that are not salty sweaters, and that's a genetic component to that, definitely. And then, yes, I mean, literally, it is a certain amount of heritability, but the amount thereof, I can't really tell you very cut and dry, the amount, or like how well you're going to have thanks to your parents, because a lot of it is also, we're all pretty good at sweating if we just get exposed to those areas and exposed to enough temperature compared to our body size. That being said, when it comes to body types that are very good at dealing with heat, it's typically people that have got longer limbs, just because limbs tend to be narrower as you go further down, so you've got greater surface area to exchange that heat at. Whereas people that are not naturally as good at heat exchange would be the people that have the really big, broad torso and the shorter legs and shorter arms, because then more of their body size is centralized. That being said, it's an advantage when it comes to to cold weather. Because now the person who's got the really long arms, that's a lot of space that we have to go through. So it's going to be harder for them to thermoregulate and stay warm. Okay, whereas if you have those nice little arms. Well, think of it, look at something like a seal. Where they're built about perfectly to deal with that type of cold weather. They're relatively, put together and dense. Whereas if you look at mammals you find in the desert, they all tend to be very thin-limbed, okay, and relatively small in general, obviously due to the heat. You don't find polar bears walking around in the desert, okay, just because the heat load would be insane. Any questions there on how we're regulating this and then how our body's going to adapt to it? Yes?
So is like body size also relative to how much somebody sweats as well?
Yes. Well, think of it along the lines of you have to thermoregulate the size. You have to have a radiator that's big enough to cool down your engine. So a Prius, it's a small engine, doesn't require a big radiator. A big block V8 needs a big radiator to thermoregulate. So how big of a person you are is definitely going to affect it. If you told me that I was going to have to be out in the Arctic for X amount of time for, one reason or another, I would actually try to gain weight just to have a little bit more insulation. Now, don't get me wrong. The amount of weight I'd have to gain to really have an insulation advantage would be very large, okay? But the same thing, if you're a smaller, skinnier person, it's going to be easier to deal with being in a warmer environment. In fact, it brings us to this building and temperatures in general. What's that, Kelsey?
I'm freezing out here. Like, my toes are cold when I have shoes on.
You barely have shoes, and I don't think you have socks.
There are socks. There's no shoe socks.
And they're obviously not showing up enough for you to keep you warm.
And I have this huge sweater on, and I'm freezing.
I'm glad you raided your grandmother's wardrobe, but...
Yeah.
Okay. No. At the end of the day, guys, do you know why most businesses and otherwise the temperature is set at 70 degrees? You guys know why it's set at 70 degrees?
Oh, because that was the temperature for a dude in a three-piece suit to be comfortable.
And not be sweating.
Like way back in the day, right?
Patriarchy, yes. This is literally based upon that. So if you're a smaller female, that's going to be a bit too cold for you. Okay, especially when you think about business casual for men compared to business casual for women. Okay? And so, if you're even bigger than that, well, yeah, it's going to be hot and you'd prefer that it was even colder. So, based upon your body size, how you thermoregulate. Okay? I am not that big of a human being, but I'm relatively dense. And the fact of the matter is, I am a very hairy man, and I'm okay with that. So, I'm fine. This is comfortable. Hang out all day. To be fair, the lab was 61 degrees this morning when we walked in. That was a bit chilly. I have been working with a sweatshirt on because my fingers hurt because they're so cold. Okay? That's the truth. It's where you're comfortable is going to be different. So, perfect world, what is the temperature in your apartment? We're just hanging out, like shorts and a t-shirt.
Like 74.
degrees sucks.
That would be good.
I would die.
Folks.
Oh my god.
Thermoregulation is related to body size.
So small, y'all.
Kelsey is a petite female, so it turns out she's going to be more comfortable in a far warmer room. Okay? Meanwhile, like my dog, we can never allow the temperature in my house to be over 70 degrees, and it pisses me off. Because it'll be 95 plus degrees outside, and my wife will be freaking out, like, oh God, he's panting. I'm like, he's a dog, that's what he does. It's 72, we have to get out ice packs. I'm like, if my dog dies sitting in an air-conditioned house over the summer, why do we own him? Like, oh God, and he's such a lovable idiot, but still. Like, but that's his reality. Like, he's permanently wearing a ski mask and everything else. Like, he's meant to live in mountains that always have snow on them. Like, that's where he's supposed to be. And he's in Kentucky. Like,
That should be his Halloween costume. He's like a bubble jacket with a ski mask.
you want to see my dog die from heat exhaustion? Like, I wanted to walk him the other night, and my wife's like, it's only 50 degrees. He might overheat. I'm like, so when it snows, it's frickin' on. Me and that guy go for hours. It's awesome. But until then. Huh?
So that sounds miserable.
Oh, no. Honestly, last year we took the firefighting gear. I took the firefighting gear from the office. Just the pants and the boots, like the steel toes. The few snows we had when like it was a late start or whatever. Put that on, throw on a sweatshirt, throw on a jacket, throw on my balaclava so you can only see out of this essentially. And we went for 4 hours.
Are you serious?
Yeah, just hiking around the neighborhoods. And we didn't see a damn soul. It was just me, the dog, and like lights on in houses, but that's it. And like by the time we turned to go back into like our little part, our street in the neighborhood, he's like, do we have to? I'm like, bud, I look like Ralphie from A Christmas Story. You've had enough, we're going home. But he rolls in snow like you guys would roll in $100 bills. Like he loves. Hey, if you just walked outside of your apartment and there was a field of $100 bills, you'd probably be like, I'm going to lay in this for a second, and then I'm loading up as much as I can.
Instant shovel,
And that's how he is. He's instant face down in it. Okay, the way Scarface would dive into a pile of cocaine. Okay, like whatever metaphor works for you. Like he loves it. Now, as we have greater and greater amounts of fluid loss, we're going to see diminishments in our VO2. Literally, how high we're going to be able to keep that performance up. How high of a general exercise capacity, literally meaning how much work we're going to be able to perform. And we're going to see this relationship trending forward the greater amount of loss we have. Now, what's interesting when it comes to this fluid loss, and we're looking at our plasma volume and our osmolarity, notice not everybody is losing fluid at the same rate. Okay? Some folks are going to have greater, some folks are going to have lesser, based upon how their own physiology is going to respond. But the big key is if we're talking about people that are acclimated, okay, so heat adapted or unadapted, we're going to find that if we're hydrated, you have a definite advantage if you're heat acclimated. Okay, you guys see like the core temperature and how high that's going to go? No, mind you, we're talking about going for more than 2 hours in this example. But notice, if you're dehydrated and you're heat acclimated, you have no advantage over someone that is unacclimated to heat and is also dehydrated. Does that make sense? So yeah, I mean, you might be better at sweating, but if you don't have the fluid to lose, you're not going to do as well. Okay? And your body's going to let your core temperature go a lot higher before it starts sweating. And this is problematic in sports like wrestling, where people are going to purposely try to sweat it out so they can make weight. And when they do this, as they try and lose more and more weight, it becomes harder and harder to get the body to start sweating. And the level they have to get their core temperature before it even is going to occur gets to be dangerously high over a long enough period of time. So, if we go too far, then we can get ourselves in a heat illness. And what are going to be those 3 stages we're going to get to? So what's the first one? Heat what?
Exhaustion. Is that it?
What comes before that?
Cramps.
Then heat exhaustion, and then finally, and that's where we're talking about potentially dying. Okay? So, what's going on is obviously we're starting off by trying to send more blood to the skin so that we can sweat, which is going to cause it to accumulate. This decreases our blood volume in general in the center of our body, which makes it so our heart isn't going to fill as much with blood, so that stroke volume goes down. It's cardiovascular drift. Okay? Our heart rate has to go up. This in turn is going to decrease our blood flow to our kidneys, through our digestive tract, and also eventually to our skin. Now, when we start decreasing our skin, well, it turns out we're not going to have as good a heat loss. Our core temperature is going to go up, and eventually that can literally bake us from the inside, causing tissue injury. Now, the other side that we get to in this class that we don't talk about in exercise physiology is we're going to increase our generation of reactive oxidative species and nitrogen generation species inside of our intestines. This in turn is going to increase gut permeability. This is literally doing damage to our GI, giving us a leaky gut from this lack of blood flow and the temperature changes, which in turn is eventually going to cause endotoxemia, which is going to insult our blood pressure because of all of the wonderful things that are now getting into our bloodstream that otherwise shouldn't be able to. And because of that, we're now doing damage to our tissues. Does that make sense? So it's two-pronged in how this is going to negatively affect our health. Okay? But does this happen the second we go outside and start sweating? No. About how far do we need to go before this becomes a real issue?
To our body's limit.
Absolutely true, yes, to whatever your limit is, but hopefully you guys aren't trying to figure out, I wonder how much I can nearly kill myself with dehydration. I wonder where this really starts to eat me alive. Say it again?
Is it over 2 hours?
Think of the percentage of fluid loss. So when we're talking about getting into over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7%, and you're right, if we're exercising and making our body do something that's stressful, that's where we're going to see this turnover become even worse. So if you're trying to manipulate your body water to make weight for a competition, your best bet is actually to take the most passive method. Like literally just try to relax and let yourself lose that weight. So when we're working with athletes, our goal is to make sure that we are getting in and topping off our fluid tanks before we even start exercising. And like I said at the beginning of class, if you just do a giant bolus to start, it's not going to really be there to help you out that much because it's just going to be in your stomach and then getting your bloodstream, then getting where it needs to be. We're talking about really pushing that hydration 1 to 2 hours beforehand. Okay? Now, when it comes time to exercise, I'll let you guys take a wild guess here. What is probably our best methodology to go ahead and increase our exercise capacity? What do we want to do?
Like Tide?
Hmm?
Like Gatorade or something? Some of those electrolytes?
Gosh, why do we always have to be product placement with you? It's an adhesive strip. It's not a Band-Aid. It's a facial tissue, not a
That's what I
Kleenex.
drink and Pedialyte.
What's in front of you right now?
Alright, but I have Pedialyte packets. I drink both.
That's not Gatorade either. Not saying you're a liar, but you just lied to us.
I said I drink both.
Pedialyte and Gatorade. I know you established that.
Powerade. They're the same thing. Powerade and Gatorade are the same thing.
A couple people perked up and like, ah! No. So, but you're right. We're going to do better. Notice this is time trial, okay? Larger fluid with carbohydrate is going to help us with our performance in general more so than doing a small fluid or fluid with carbohydrate or just that large fluid alone, okay? Because we're also having positive effects on our blood glucose level, topping off the glycogen, okay? Now, when it comes to time to just fatigue, how much you can handle, isotonic or hypotonic drinks. So meaning it's not just plain water, but then it also has electrolytes, so it's even with our body, or it just has some electrolytes, but not as high as the amount in our body. Now, when you guys are looking at this graph, don't think immediately that hypotonic is the best way to go because the average is higher. But what do you see when you look above the top of these individual bars? What do you see? You see more lines. Yes, what are those lines indicative of?
Higher levels.
That's the air bar. Does that make sense? So notice the isotonic drink, there's some people that dominated, and pure water did better than the hypotonic in general. But we can definitely see with trending and overall, it's definitely better to be giving them some type of fluid than no fluid whatsoever. Okay? And look at the duration. Okay? This duration time trial was only taking people about how many minutes?
Between 9.5 and 11.
Yeah, we're starting pretty much about 10 minutes and a little bit more. Okay? This is to fatigue. Okay? Do you do many exercises that are to fatigue, where we're talking about doing it for about 100 odd minutes? No, that's not going to be exactly the best type of carryover, okay? But that's why we talk about these things, okay? If we're looking at that plasma volume, if we have something that's hypertonic, meaning it's got greater amounts of solute that you're going to find inside of the blood and otherwise, notice that your hydration is not going to be coming back up as fast if you do something that's hypotonic. So that's where if it is too sweet. And usually half the time, the way Gatorade and Powerade is really made these days, unless you're getting the light version, it's really water it down. Try to go like a 50-50 split. Because if you go too high, you're actually going to be potentially being in a hypertonic situation, so you're not going to be able to pick it up as quickly and as efficiently as you would otherwise. Okay? And overall, adding fluid is better than no fluid. Go figure. Science is very complex. Okay? But we can definitely tell you, depending on the situations where an individual is working out or what sport they're playing, we are going to see pretty large fluid shifts. One thing that would be interesting and also perhaps slightly off-putting, but it would be, well, we're a little late now in the game, but it's something to go and try and do earlier on, which is weigh, for the soccer team, weigh the ladies pre-game, weigh them post-game, and then also keep in mind how much fluid and how much food they ate during the game. Does that make sense? And if we see what your fluid shifts are, like, oh, maybe Idalis loses 2-3 pounds of water each game, so she obviously did not hydrate appropriately through it, or what she could tolerate. You do get in the limits. How many of you guys have drank too much water, tried to run or anything else like that, and started having cramping or GI discomfort? It's very normal, okay? So that's where, if we know her normal body weight is this, we might want her to start the game a pound or two heavy from extra fluid that she drank ahead of time, so she's got a bigger amount to lose. Now, meanwhile, Bailey maybe only lost a pound or two. And let's be honest, sport of soccer is random and chaotic. You could have a game where you are essentially right in it, nearly all of it. You could have a game where you don't do nearly anything, just because of the way the ball plays and obviously a number of other factors. But it'll at least give you an idea of where we're at when it comes to fluid shifts with our athletes. And that's something for you guys, if you're working with a high-level athlete, to keep in mind. Because we can show you the data on how you're going to see a decline in performance in a variety of ways when we get to higher levels of dehydration. So whatever we can do to optimize the hydration of our athlete, we're probably going to gain just a little bit more performance during the match, and that's really what matters. Any questions through here, guys? So, dehydration's bad. It's gonna cause you to work out worse. You're gonna do a lot more poorly. It's okay. It's pretty hardcore. If you guys didn't already know that. Now, when we talk about the concentrations of these electrolytes in different areas, so we're talking about sweat, your blood plasma, and then also in your intracellular levels. When we're talking about things that are isotonic or hypertonic, we're really talking about how this is going to be relative to what's going on inside of our plasma. Okay? Now, notice we see ranges on our potassium, our sodium, calcium, all of these different minerals when we're sweating. Why would that be? Why would that be? Your sweat varies throughout the day? You're right. When we talk about the blood volumes, that's going to go. But no. This is going to be the actual concentration in your sweat. And that's where we talk about that salty sweater and then also being adapted to hot weather and being able to sweat more. So for some individuals, they're going to be on that higher end where they're naturally going to have a lot more issues with cramping up than other individuals. So that's where for them, they shouldn't be doing plain water. They should be doing, maybe that's your Pedialyte or some other type of beverage that for sure has extra sodium, potassium, and other minerals in there so we can keep up their performance because their electrolyte levels aren't going to tank. Ladies, anybody on your team have issues with in the heat?
We haven't had anything, but Katie, last year she didn't. I don't think she ate nor drank correctly.
So it's more of a fueling issue than just like some people naturally. Any of you guys play sports with somebody that really just seem to cramp up all the time? Okay, and it might not be because they've made poor decisions. It can sometimes literally be because that's who they are. We had there was an athlete that I worked with, fantastic female athlete, who played volleyball. So it's an indoor sport. Usually, it's air conditioned. So mind you, 70-degree room. But that girl would get she was one of those people that got real close to whole body cramps. Yeah, that's one of the first times an athlete has ever told me to go F myself. Because they were stretching out, and I was trying to assist her a little bit, and her hamstring seized. Right, yeah. So she understandably was upset about that, vocalized it very quickly and aggressively. I stepped away from her. You're good. Sorry about that. I will not try to stretch your quad again because your hamstring just kicked you in the butt, literally. And yeah, not a good day for her. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? Okay? So, our best strategies is going to be to make sure that we're taking this in before we're exercising, and then to make sure we're doing this during exercise. We're talking about during exercise, about how much fluid are we really talking about? How much fluid are we really talking about?
During how long an exercise?
Could be long, could be short, but in general, if we've got something that's going to be, if you're just going to be out there for half an hour, I don't think we really need to worry too much about dehydration. But this would be hour, 2, 3 hour practices, and then also obviously exercising in heat or warm enough environments that they're going to be sweating a lot. So about how much?
8 ounces an hour.
How many you guys are with Rob? It's okay. One person with confidence is a majority. At the end of the day, guys, think of it relative to body size and the individual. Okay? If you're a bigger person, you can probably handle a greater amount of fluid in an hour. But even then, how many of you guys know if you try to drink, so 8 ounces, most of those water bottles you have are 20 ounces, okay? So just trying to do a third of that in one bolus would be enough that you would be uncomfortable. You'd potentially be cramping up. Any of you guys know yourself or be that person? Oh, wow. How many of you guys could drink that entire bottle and then go back out there to running? Yeah, a couple of you guys can. I used to live dangerously. I'd eat pizza, then hop in the pool and swim, because screw it. I'm not gonna die. I'm too rough for that. No, but at the end of the day, you have to figure out what the physiology of you or of your athlete can handle. So what's too big of a bolus of water or fluid in general? What's going to be uncomfortable? And then also, let's be honest, how many of you guys have had some type of beverage and then you had massive cotton mouth or otherwise afterwards because the Gatorade was too sweet or otherwise, I feel like I'm actually less hydrated than I was a minute ago. So lighter flavors, maybe things that are otherwise, and obviously, let's be honest, also cold fluids are going to usually go down a lot easier, especially if we're in that really hot environment. But individual tolerance is the thing to figure out. And part of that is just practice. Okay? So, every day we're gaining and losing fluid. Okay? We're getting it in from our food, from our beverages, and then we're actually getting in a certain amount as a byproduct of just metabolism. Okay? Now on the losses side, any of these surprising for you? Really?
Skin.
Well, skin makes sense because that's sweating.
I thought you meant like dead skin. I was like, oh, plural, what?
Nope, that's actually part of more of your nitrogen shifts.
Yeah, that's why I was like,
Respiration.
Yeah, respiration. That's the thing that a lot of people forget is literally the act of breathing in and breathing out. You have to, your lungs have to be hydrated. If they don't, you don't get good gas exchange. It's got yourself a lot of issues. And if you're in a very arid environment, like you're out in the desert, otherwise you're going to have a greater amount of fluid loss due to respiration. Because when it gets cold outside, what can you see when you breathe out? That's that fluid loss. Every single breath in, on the way back out, you're losing a little bit of fluid. Okay? Now, do you necessarily have to do the bodybuilder walking around with a gallon of water each day?
No.
No. What's going to be probably your best way to go about it if we're working with folks in general? What's going to be the best way that we're going to really be able to work with them?
Just bottles of water.
Think indicator. What's a good indicator you can find? Something to be simple to kind of look at your hydration levels. It's not perfect, but it's a
Color
decent
your feet.
indicator. Yeah, literally the color of your urine. Okay? And what's also interesting, it's not just the color of your urine, and it often can annoy some people, but it's the frequency. Does that make sense? Like, if you've got to get up and pee every 5 seconds, are you probably hydrated?
Yeah.
Yeah. You go for an entire day and realize, it's been like 8 hours and I haven't had to use the bathroom. Probably a good indicator that you're not that hydrated. Does that make sense? So both the desire to use the restroom and then obviously what type of color essentially are we dealing with whenever we're getting there. So when we talk about adequate hydration before exercise, make sure that they're drinking fluids 1, 2, 3 hours before practice, so that way they've got their fluid balance up. Okay? When we're talking about during exercise, real simple, what do we make sure we give the athletes?
Dinner and water.
Drink breaks. Yeah, an opportunity to go get a break. Any of you guys ever had a coach that decided to listen to that stupid line from Remember the Titans? Water makes you weak. Like, yeah. You're right, coach. Water makes you weak. Don't drink water ever again in your life. Let me know how that goes for you. Hey, I'm just asking. If you're going to be a science denier, deny frickin' science. Just go for it. Oh, can't have that food. It's got water in it, coach. It's making you weak. Raw protein powder. That's all you get. Let me know how that works out for you. Okay? But the funny thing is, there's actually some animals that are so efficient at pulling water out of food, along with retaining it and getting it through their metabolic processes, they actually do not need water to live. That's actually a certain species of desert mouse. Actually doesn't need to actually drink water to live.
What about a camel?
They still need to drink water.
Like how much?
I have not ever owned a camel. I couldn't tell you.
I'm pretty sure they actually drink a lot.
When they just store a bunch.
Yeah.
Do it.
Yeah. So now, when we're talking about the composition of drinks, obviously we've got a couple different examples here. A number of these probably do not seem very familiar to you guys, but to give you an idea of both the carbohydrate load, the sodium load, the potassium load, and then the osmolarity. Remember that higher osmolarity we can have some issues with trying to pick them up. So it is usually more of our Gatorade and Powerade. That's going to be a little bit easier. Even then, we might need to water it down depending on the individual and who we're working with. And then obviously the more exercise we're doing, the greater the temperature is outside, the greater amount of fluid we're going to have to intake every single day. Okay? If you're more active, irregardless if it's cold outside or warm outside, you're going to be burning, or you're going to have greater fluid losses. Because not all the sweat is always going to be sticking to your clothes where you know you've had that weight shift. Okay? A lot of it is the stuff that's going to evaporate pretty quickly and you don't even realize. Like most of your hands, if you feel them, there's probably just a little bit, they're just a little bit wet. Okay? And so, once we get done, we want them to go ahead and try to hydrate themselves back up. About what type of ratio are we looking at with rehydration? About what type of ratio? So let's say Nate loses a pound of water working out. About how much water do we want him to take in to help replenish that? Say again?
Is it equal? Is more level?
About 1.5 times would be a good ballpark there. It's actually not, because we're not perfectly efficient. So part of that you're going to be losing anyways due to the wonders of the digestive tract, also going to the bathroom because now you've increased your water level. So figure, rule of thumb, 1.5 times what you've lost. Okay? Now, when it comes to just fluids in general, okay, that's where it depends on what we're trying to do. If it's a tournament weekend and you got to play another game pretty soon, that's what we're talking about, putting down some type of Gatorade or something else that's going to not just rehydrate us, but also replenish our glycogen levels, so we're going to be good to go. If it's just you just get done working out, fluid in general is going to be fine unless we're trying to optimize muscle protein synthesis, things along those lines. And by all means, let's do a protein shake or otherwise. It's going to give us both fluid and protein powder to help with the recovery. But either way, we should probably be drinking something. Might not be hitting the monster up in order so we can get ourselves back up. You and Bree need to go find a place you guys can like nap on campus or something, because boy howdy, you guys are hitting it to make it happen. Okay? So does that make sense? When we're talking about fluids and how that's going to be shifting for us. Okay? And then depending on that concentration of those different electrolytes and the bolus that we're going to be putting through our body, we're going to have obviously faster or slower rehydration. So in general, okay, that's the millimolar, and then this is the total volume. Notice whenever we kick up the volume, we have a much faster fluid balance regain. So really, it's how much you're drinking. It's just not necessarily what the concentration is. If you try to put down a lot of fluids, you're going to be fine. Now, there are some exceptions to this. If you've got an athlete that just tried to lose a lot of weight through water weight, and then they are now trying to gain all their water weight back as fast as possible, their GI can sometimes be a little upset with them in that transition, and that actually can acutely cause diarrhea. So it's important then to try to not chug all that water at once, but instead be consistent with slowly trying to take it in throughout that day to help with rehydration. Any questions about fluid balance and otherwise? No?